Leaders may come and go, but no one can match the greatness of the world's greatest military general, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was an ancient Macedonian ruler and one of history's greatest military minds, who, as king of Macedonia and Persia, established the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. By turns charismatic and ruthless, brilliant and power-hungry, diplomatic and bloodthirsty, Alexander inspired such loyalty in his men they'd follow him anywhere and, if necessary, die in the process. Though Alexander the Great died before realizing his dream of uniting a new realm, his influence on Greek and Asian culture was so profound that it inspired a new historical epic, the Hellenistic period. Alexander's childhood. Alexander III was born in Pella, Macedonia, in 356 BC to King Philip II and Queen Olympias, although legend had it his father was none other than Zeus, the ruler of the Greek gods. Philip II was an impressive military man in his own right. He turned Macedonia, a region on the northern part of the Greek peninsula, into a force to be reckoned with, and he fantasized about conquering the massive Persian Empire. At age 12, Alexander showed impressive courage when he tamed the wild horse Bucephalus, an enormous stallion with a furious demeanor. The horse became his battle companion for most of Alexander's life. When Alexander was 13, Philip called on the great philosopher Aristotle to tutor his son. Aristotle sparked and fostered Alexander's interest in literature, science, medicine, and philosophy. Alexander was just 16 when Philip went to battle the Byzantine Empire and left his son in charge of Macedonia. In 338 BC, Alexander saw the opportunity to prove his military worth and led a cavalry against the sacred band of Thebes, a supposedly unbeatable, select army made up entirely of male lovers during the Battle of Chaeronea. Alexander put his vigor and bravery on display, and his cavalry decimated the sacred band of Thebes. Alexander takes the thrones. In 336 BC, Alexander's father Philip was assassinated by his bodyguard Pausanias. Just 20 years old, Alexander claimed the Macedonian throne and killed his rivals before they could challenge his sovereignty. He also quashed rebellions for independence in northern Greece. Once he'd cleaned house, Alexander left to follow in his father's footsteps and continue Macedonia's world domination. Alexander appointed the general Antipater as regent and headed for Persia with his army. They crossed the Hellespont, a narrow strait between the Aegean Sea and the Sea of Marmara, and faced Persian and Greek forces at the Granicus River. Victory went to Alexander and the Macedonians. Alexander then headed south and easily took the city of Sardes. But his army encountered resistance in the cities of Miletus, Mylassa, and Halicarnassus. Under siege yet not beaten, Halicarnassus held out long enough for King Darius III, the newest Persian king, to amass a substantial army. Battle of Issus. In 333 BC, Alexander and his men encountered a massive Persian army led by King Darius III, near the town of Issus in southern Turkey. Alexander's forces were greatly outnumbered in men, but not in experience or the determination for revenge, and to claim Persia's great wealth, much of it plundered. As it became clear Alexander would win the Battle of Issus, Darius fled with what remained of his troops, leaving his wife and family behind. His mother, Sisygambis, was so upset she disowned him and adopted Alexander as her son. Battle of Tyre. Next, Alexander took over the Phoenician cities of Marathus and Aradus. He rejected a plea from Darius for peace and took the towns of Byblos and Sidon. He then laid siege to the heavily fortified island of Tyre in January 332 BC, after the Tyrians refused him entry. But Alexander had no navy to speak of, and Tyre was surrounded by water. He amassed a large fleet, finally breached the city's walls in July 332 BC, and executed thousands of Tyrians for daring to defy him. Many others were sold into slavery. Proclaimed Pharaoh of Egypt. After rejecting another peace offer from Darius, Alexander set out for Egypt. He was sidelined at Gaza, however, and forced to endure another lengthy siege. After several weeks, he took the town and entered Egypt, where he established the city that still bears his name, Alexandria. Alexander crowned as king of Persia. After conquering Egypt, in October 331 BC, Alexander faced Darius and his massive troops at Gaugamela. Following fierce fighting and heavy losses on both sides, Darius fled and was assassinated by his own troops. It's said Alexander was sad when he found Arius's body, and he gave him a royal burial. Finally rid of Darius, Alexander proclaimed himself king of Persia. But another Persian leader, Bessus, also thought to be Darius's murderer, had also claimed the Persian throne. Alexander couldn't let the claim stand. After relentless pursuit by Alexander, Bessus's troops handed Bessus over to Ptolemy, Alexander's good friend, and he was mutilated and executed. With Bessus out of the way, Alexander had full control of Persia. Army generals. Increasingly paranoid, Alexander ordered the death of one of his most esteemed generals, Parmenio, in 330 BC, after Parmenio's son Philotas was convicted of plotting an assassination attempt against Alexander, and also killed. In 328 BC, Cletus, another general and close friend of Alexander, also met a violent end. Fed up with Alexander's new Persian-like persona, a drunk Cletus continually insulted Alexander and minimized his achievements. Pushed too far, Alexander killed Cletus with a spear, a spontaneous act of violence that anguished him. Alexander enters India. In 327 BC, Alexander marched on Punjab, India. Some tribes surrendered peacefully, others did not. In 326 BC, Alexander met King Porus of Purava at the Hydaspes River. Porus's army was less experienced than Alexander's, but they had a secret weapon, elephants. Even so, after a fierce battle in a raging thunderstorm, Porus was defeated. One event took place at Hydaspes which devastated Alexander, the death of his beloved horse, Bucephalus. Alexander wanted to press on and attempt to conquer all of India, but his war-weary soldiers refused, and his officers convinced him to return to Persia. So Alexander led his troops down the Indus River, and was severely wounded during a battle with the Mali. After recovering, he divided his troops, sending half of them back to Persia and half to Gedrosia, a desolate area west of the Indus River. Death of Alexander the Great. By 323 BC, Alexander was head of an enormous empire. Thanks to his insatiable urge for world supremacy, he started plans to conquer Arabia. But he'd never live to see it happen. After surviving battle after fierce battle, Alexander the Great died in June 323 BC at age 32. Some historians say Alexander died of malaria or other natural causes, others believe he was poisoned. Either way, he never named a successor. His death and the bloody infighting for control that happened afterwards unraveled the empire he'd fought so hard to create. The period of history from his death to 31 BC, when his empire folded, would come to be known as the Hellenistic period, from Hellezein, which means to speak Greek or identify with the Greeks. Although he died at young age, but still, Alexander the Great is revered as one of the most powerful and influential leaders the ancient world ever produced.